Hello, Mr. Hardy here, and in this video I would like to teach you about Chapter 8 of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, titled The Last Night. So as per usual, we'll go over the plot first. We'll then look at the key characters, context, themes and quotes you may want to commit to memory ahead of your assessments, and I'll leave you with an exam style question that you can answer if you want to get some writing practice in. So what happens in Chapter 8 titled The Last Night? Well, Poole, who is Jekyll's butler, visits Mr. Utterson, and Poole is visibly disturbed, and he reveals to Utterson that he suspects foul play. Now this means murder. He suspects that Mr. Hyde has murdered Dr. Jekyll, probably to get the will early. Utterson grabs his coat and he follows Poole back to Jekyll's house. Now, as they enter Jekyll's house, Utterson finds all the servants huddled together by the fire in fear, and he actually uses a simile to compare them to sheep, who can be quite scared and need a shepherd to look after them. In this case, Utterson is the shepherd figure. Poole and Utterson then walk through the house, through the garden, to Dr. Jekyll's laboratory that we've been referring to as Blackmail House, because that's how Enfield described it in Chapter 1. Poole then informs Jekyll that Utterson is here, but a voice dismisses them. Now, you would expect the voice to be Jekyll, because Poole is talking to Jekyll. However, the voice does not sound like Dr. Jekyll, and Poole and Utterson have a discussion and actually say, that voice doesn't sound like Jekyll. So it becomes apparent that they might have to break in to discover the truth. Who is actually in the laboratory, Blackmail House? Is it Jekyll or is it Hyde, or is it someone else entirely? So both men sort of come clean and they admit what they think is going on. They share some information. Poole believes that his master, Dr. Jekyll, has been murdered by Mr. Hyde, probably so Mr. Hyde could claim the will early. Whoever is currently in Jekyll's laboratory, which is also called Blackmail House, has been writing letters demanding a chemical from chemists all over London. So this is quite clearly Hyde and Jekyll demanding that chemical so that he can control the potion that transforms from one to the other. Poole also reveals that he saw his master once and could not recognise him, so his voice has changed. His face was covered in a mask, and when he moved like a monkey. He didn't even move like a human. Now, Utterson tries to bring some calm to the situation by providing a solution. Utterson suggests that maybe Jekyll has some kind of malady, some kind of illness that maybe manipulates the voice, maybe deforms the face, maybe distorts the body, and that all of this could be solved with, regular science and medicine. However, both men, I think, realise that that's just a hope, a comfort. That's probably not the reality. So eventually Utterson and Poole resolve to break down the door into the laboratory, into Blackmail House, and discover the truth. Who is in there? Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, somebody else. So before entering, both men admit that they suspect it's Mr. Hyde in there and not Dr. Jekyll. At this stage, they both suspect that Mr. Hyde has probably killed Dr. Jekyll. They arm themselves with an axe and a poker. Poole has the axe and Utterson has a poker, which is a metal stick for manipulating wood in a fireplace. And they call in the footman, Bradshaw, and a boy as backup. And they arm themselves with sticks and they position themselves in case whoever's inside Blackmail House tries to escape. Utterson announces to whoever's inside the laboratory, inside Blackmail House, that they're about to break in, and Poole starts to smash down the door with the axe. It takes 4 or 5 swings, but they finally smash down the door, and they discover Hyde dying on the floor, having drunk cyanide. Now, cyanide is a chemical that will kill you. You can make it in a laboratory. You can find it in really small quantities in sort of like the nuts of fruit. But in this case, it's quite apparent it's a suicide. Hyde has drunk this deadly potion, this cyanide, of his own accord and has taken his own life. Utterson and Poole then search for Jekyll's body. They suspect Hyde has murdered Jekyll, so surely somewhere in this room they will find the body of their master and friend. but rather bizarrely, they cannot find it. And they look all over the place. They even go outside and they find a smashed up key, and then they return inside because the kettle is whistling, the kettle is boiling, and they start looking carefully around Blackmail House, around the laboratory. They start looking at the chemicals, and eventually they find an envelope addressed to Utterson. Now inside the envelope there are more envelopes, there are more letters. There are 3 things of importance. There's a revised will, so Jekyll has revised his will. Previously, Jekyll's will stated that if he died or disappeared, everything would go to Mr. Hyde. But in this new will, Jekyll has written, everything is to be left to Mr. Utterson, which will make Utterson an extremely, extremely rich man. We also find in this envelope Dr. Lanyon's narrative. So we know that Dr. Lanyon died of shock having seen this transformation. And now we're going to get his narrative in the form of a letter. And we also get Dr. Jekyll's confession, so we'll get the story from Dr. Jekyll's point of view. Now remember, letters and envelopes are used as a technique to withhold information to create suspense. Here is Utterson with all the answers to this mystery in his hand, but Stevenson denies the reader this satisfaction yet. He teases it out for another couple of chapters. This is called withholding information. It's a writing technique, and it's designed to build suspense in the reader. Utterson then decides, rather sensibly, to return to his home, read these documents carefully before coming to a decision on what to do. So there you have it, the plot of Chapter 8. Let's take a look at some of the characters and how they're presented in this part of the novella. So we have our protagonist, we have our narrator, Mr. Utterson, and he's presented as a helper by Stevenson. When Poole and Jekyll's servants fear for their master, they turn to Utterson for help. I mean, if you suspect someone's been murdered in your property, you probably turn to the police, but clearly they have such faith in Utterson, they prefer turning to Utterson for help. We also learn Utterson is brave. He's willing to put himself in grave danger. Bear in mind, they think that Hyde has murdered Jekyll, and they know that Hyde has murdered Sir Danvers Carew, and they know that Hyde has trampled over a little girl, so Hyde is clearly a violent man, but they're willing to put themselves in danger and confront Hyde to help his friend Jekyll and to help his master from Poole's point of view. So both these men are very, very brave, and they're both seeking after the truth. They want to solve this mystery. Utterson is very reputation conscious. We know in the Victorian era, gentlemen were very concerned about maintaining their reputation, and Utterson is no different. He decides to read the documents at home, so he has time to process them and not risk his or Jekyll's reputation publicly. We also get Poole. He's more of a minor character, but he has a major role in this particular chapter. He comes across as loyal. He professes to know his master, Dr. Jekyll, inside and out. Poole is also presented as brave. He's willing to put himself in danger for his master, for his employer. Poole is presented as powerful. He's a man of action. He uses strength to break down the door. Poole also says a couple of phrases that might suggest he's of Scottish heritage, and that would also link to the fact that Stevenson lived in Edinburgh. So maybe there's a little nod to Scottish men within the character of Poole. And Poole also acts as an observer and a witness. So Utterson is our narrator and narrates these stories to the reader, but Utterson doesn't live with Jekyll, so we don't really know what's going on in Jekyll's property and Blackmail House, except for when Poole tells Utterson this. So we learn what's been going on in Jekyll's property from the point of view of the butler, the servant, Poole. So in this case, he's a very important part of the narrative, because we learn that this creature who lives in the laboratory in Blackmail House is wearing a mask, moves like a monkey, sends an icy feeling down his spine. We get these clues and these hints from Poole. And at this stage, the character of Jekyll and Hyde are inextricably linked. They're so closely linked. Even if you're reading this for the first time, you should be able to work out these characters might be one in the same. We learn that Jekyll is losing control of himself and Hyde is taking over and is becoming more and more dominant. This is a bit worrying, because if Jekyll represents good and Hyde represents evil, does this suggest that evil will eventually take over? That's a deep question to think about. By Hyde committing suicide, he has also doomed Jekyll to the same fate because they're one and the same person. The question I want to ask you is, does Jekyll deserve to die in this tragic way? After all, he is a largely good character, but because of his one mistake in creating Hyde, does he deserve this suicidal, tragic ending? I'll leave you to debate that amongst yourself. So, contextually speaking, fin de siècle, it's not an English word, but it means end of century. And in the Victorian era, there were serious concerns that at the end of the century, there would be dramatic changes to British society, potentially for the worse. Now, let me say that most societies have this feeling that they're living in a time of doom and gloom. So it's nothing new there, but the Victorians were very concerned that Britain was rapidly changing, partly because of the Industrial Revolution, and that these changes would be for the worst. One of the things they feared was migration, leading to overpopulation and disease. So if you lived in the countryside of England, you maybe couldn't get rich. You were farming, you were working the land. But if you moved to London, you could get rich, starting up a factory, something like that. So a lot of people moved to London, which became very crowded. They didn't really have the infrastructure to deal with sort of the pollution or the waste, the human waste of the disease that spread. So there's very real fears around this. And part of these Stevenson deals with in his novella. There were also fears over sexuality, particularly homosexuality. Now, I've read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde many times now, and I don't particularly pick up on this, but other teachers and other commentators on the text pick up on this alleged Jekyll and Hyde homosexual relationship, particularly earlier on in the novella. And remembering that this was a largely Christian society with Christian values, the idea of being homosexual would have been shameful or forbidden outright at the time. And this also boils over to the idea of promiscuity and prostitution. Again, biblically speaking, prostitution is immoral, paying for another person's body. You're supposed to keep yourself pure to your partner who you've married. So this idea would be frowned upon by the Victorian society, who were very into their morality and maintaining a good reputation. So now that London was increasingly full of people, now that there were brothels and drug dens and other things popping up all over London, Victorian society worried that there would be a decay. Society would get worse and not better. And this ties into the next point about fears over morality. So the Victorian era was a largely Christian society, and in the Bible there's values such as the Ten Commandments, and there's different other suggestions and ideas about how you should live a moral life. But there is a worry that this is now being replaced by something called decadence, living luxuriously. If you were the owner of a big company in London, you could do whatever you wanted, more or less. So, for example, the Bible might suggest you only have sex with your married partner, but if you were very rich and very powerful, why couldn't you have sex with loads of people? Maybe the same goes for alcohol. The Bible would recommend only drinking a moderate amount of alcohol, but if you were financially wealthy enough and powerful enough to drink lots and lots of alcohol and get drunk, why wouldn't you do that? So there were fears that this Christian, strict moral society would decay into one of drugs and alcohol and sex, and there was a fear that society would get worse. Stevenson expresses pretty much all of these fears through the character of Hyde. Hyde looks deformed, maybe diseased. He doesn't look like a normal, upstanding gentleman. There are suggestions of his sexuality, whether it's homosexuality or in some film depictions, like use of prostitutes and brothels. He doesn't have these Christian values of treating other people with respect. He tramples over a girl. I think one of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not commit murder. He goes on to murder Sir Danvers Carew. There's another suggestion in the Bible that you shouldn't commit suicide. Some Christians believe if you do that you will end up in hell. Well, Hyde commits suicide and therefore damns himself and Jekyll to hell. So all of these fin de siècle, end of century fears are really represented by Stevenson through this character of Hyde. this would be a great bit of context to bring into an essay about Edward Hyde. Okay, looking at themes, ideas that run throughout the novella, there's a clear theme of good versus evil. Now Jekyll, I would argue, represents good, although this is a little bit questionable, and we'll find out about this in chapter 10 when we read Jekyll's confession. Hyde represents evil. This is beyond doubt. I don't think anyone questions that. Trampling a girl, murdering a beautiful politician, Sir Danvers Carew, committing suicide and therefore killing himself and Jekyll. I think we can all agree these are pretty evil acts. Now, we can link this to the theme of duality, this idea that man is not one but two. There are two natures inside all of us, and humans struggle with it. One nature is how we should present to society, as an upright, moral, respectable gentleman or gentlewoman. But then there is this other side of us, this animal side, particularly with the theory of evolution, this base side that wants to beat our chest and have sex and get drunk and just do whatever the body feels like doing. Now, worryingly, Hyde, who represents evil and all those base desires, eventually gains control over Jekyll, who represents goodness, Victorian morals, upright Christian thinking. So we get this idea that evil, if left unchecked, will eventually triumph in us, which is a very scary thought indeed, because if that happens to most people in society, if most people cannot control themselves, if most people's evil overpowers their good, then society really would fall apart. And that's what we've just learnt about in Fin de Siècle, the end of century fears. Now here's another question for you to mull over and debate. Hyde commits suicide, suggesting a weakness in evil. So Hyde couldn't handle the situation, he couldn't handle his evilness, so he commits suicide. Does this mean that good triumphs over evil? Because after all, in committing suicide, Hyde brings Jekyll down with him, brings his good side down with him. So here's the question I'm phrasing to you. In a battle of good versus evil, really, who would win? And in this novella, which of these themes, good or evil, actually wins, in your opinion? You could write an entire essay about that. And actually, that's what I'm going to encourage you to write in a bit. So let's take a look at some key quotes. We're going to work through it chronologically from the start of the chapter to the end. Mr. Utterson, there is something wrong. So that use of the word wrong, Poole acknowledges something's going wrong with Jekyll, and Mr. Utterson is the person he turns to for help. Poole says, I think there's been foul play. You'd have to look at that noun phrase foul play and you'd link it to murder. It was a cold, wild, seasonable night. So Stevenson has written this, and this is an example of prophetic fallacy. Actually, he does this throughout the novella. He uses the setting of London and its coldness and darkness and dirtiness and dampness to foreshadow evil actions. Stevenson's prophetic fallacy goes even further. The locations where characters live reveal things about them. So Hyde lives in Blackmail House, it's dirty and run down, whereas Lanyon lives in Cavendish Square, it's upright and moral. So when you're analysing extracts, have a look at the weather, have a look at the setting. Stevenson often uses that as a device to reveal something about the character or the story. So when Utterson enters Jekyll's house, the servants are huddled together like a flock of sheep. This simile suggests they are scared, and sheep need a shepherd, and in this case that's going to be Mr. Utterson. It seems much changed. When talking about the voice they hear, which they think is Jekyll, instead of using a pronoun like he, they used it. So it's almost as if it's no longer human, it's become some kind of weird creature. It has changed. For God's sake, find me some of the old. When Jekyll writes his notes to the chemist, most of it seems under control, except for this final line, for God's sake, find me some of the old. I think that's a little bit of Hyde coming out. So again, this battle of good versus evil. Why? Had he a mask upon his face? Why? Did he cry out like a rat? This is Poole describing his master, Jekyll, who he now suspects is Hyde. So we get some rhetorical questions here. We get the repetition of why in the question mark. And we get a simile here, crying out like a rat. Now with rats we think of disease and deformity. You could link it back to chapter 1, when Hyde is described as deformed, you can link it back to this fin de siècle idea of disease and overpopulation. Rats tend to be associated with evilness, so again, Hyde being compared to a rat, this would be a simile that most people would relate to in Victorian England. Was it Mr. Hyde? Why, yes, I think it was, said Poole. So here they're confessing who they think is actually in Blackmail House in Jekyll's laboratory. Well, when that masked thing like a monkey. So here's a simile comparing Hyde to a monkey using like. It's a simile. You could quite easily link this to Darwin's theory of evolution that proposes that we evolved from apes and monkeys. And if we can evolve from apes, surely we could devolve, we could get worse and return to our wild monkey-like state. Evil, I fear, Utterson describing what is going on in Blackmail House in Jekyll's property. That use of the word evil, you could easily link it to the theme of good versus evil. Weeping like a woman or a lost soul. Poole is describing Jekyll and Hyde here. Again, we get a simile comparing the weeping to a woman or a lost soul. You could explore gender roles, maybe, if you look at the noun woman. You could explore Christian morality if you look at the abstract noun soul. A couple of ways you could look at that quote. The body of a man sorely contorted and still twitching. So this is a description of Hyde's body after he's drunk cyanide and committed suicide. Words like contorted, twitching, these verbs imply a lot of pain and suffering. Maybe you could go on to argue, is it justified that Hyde suffers painfully? After all, he has killed and trampled on 2 innocent victims. Nowhere was there any trace of Henry Jekyll dead or alive. This serves to amplify the mystery. How or why is Dr. Jekyll not in his abode when Hyde is? Your unworthy and unhappy friend Henry Jekyll. This is how Jekyll signs off his letter. You could maybe look at the adjectives unworthy, unhappy. You could explore what worthy and happy means, and then you could look at how the prefix undoes that. It's a bit like Henry Jekyll. He was worthy, he was happy, but since he got into transcendental experimental science, he's almost added his own un to those words, unworthy, unhappy, by creating Hyde. The 2 narratives in which this mystery was now to be explained. Oof, terrible typing. 2 narratives needs an S and 2 needs an O. So apologies for that. Stevenson does this. It's called withholding information. So Utterson has the letters that solve this mystery, Dr. Lanyon's letter and Dr. Jekyll's confession, but he isn't revealing it yet. He's revealing it in stages to keep that tension in the reader, to keep that level of excitement. So, if you want to practice writing, let's return to this idea of good and evil. First of all, make some notes from this video on a physical copy of the novella, and then answer this question. How does Stevenson present the battle between good and evil in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? If you've read all the way to the end, feel free to use what you learn in chapter 10 in particular to help you with this. If not, have a look at what you've learnt in chapter 8 with me in this video, and what you've learnt throughout the novella. There is a battle of good and evil. Good is largely represented by characters like Lanyon, Utterson, and you could argue Jekyll. Evil is most clearly represented by Hyde. How is this battle going on? Could you link this to fin de siècle ideas? Could you link this to other themes such as duality? Could you link this to Victorian morality? There's all sorts of ways you could go about exploring the battle of good versus evil in this detective Gothic novella. If you found this video useful, please like it, please subscribe for more Jekyll and Hyde videos, and leave a comment if you think I missed anything out. Well, thank you for your attention, and I'll see you on the next one.